Hey everybody, this is Talkative Carl, back again for another TV show or slash anime review. Uh, this is season one of my fifth favorite anime of all time, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I mentioned this before: Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, like Pokemon number one, Yu-Gi-Oh 2, 3 Naruto, 4 Bleach, and number 5 JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I think I got into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure like at least maybe like 4 years ago. I like to say maybe around 4 years ago, and I don't know if like either something like about it from another thing caught my, or at least piqued my interest about it, and I kind of delved right into it, or I just stumbled upon it. I think it was the former. And ever since then, like, it's bizarre. It is like they live up to the name bizarre. Uh, this show, I mean, like, of course, Joe's Bizarre Adventure. I only get to make sure I might butcher this name, but uh, the franchise is written by Horiko Ariki or Araki Hiroko Haraki. That is the current writer of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And man, I just fell in love with this anime. But of course, we're going through. There will be like a new season of it coming on Netflix with JoJo's Jotaro Kujo's daughter, because they go through different generations per season, and which I always thought that was like a brilliant idea. But in case I don't bring it up when I do season 2 review, they kind of make the previous protagonists kind of seem like not like completely useless, but it's kind of like all the things that made them awesome in their, when they was like the primary protagonist, when they have to hand the reins over to the new protagonist, if they're still around, they kind of feel like they should be like, it's kind of like the way like Kakashi is, it's like, just because like Naruto is like powerful in his own right, does not devalue how awesome Kakashi is by comparison. Because Kakashi obviously is not somebody to be messed with, because he doesn't need, like, just because the protagonist Naruto is around doesn't make him weak by any comparison. And that's how I feel like when they made Jonathan Joestar kind of like the co-star to his grandson in season 2. I mean, obviously it's not what they're trying to do, because new protagonist is their thing. They got to be like the hero in this arc. But man, they like kind of did my boy Jonathan kind of dirty, at least a tiny bit in the second season. But there's 2 arcs in here: Phantom Blood in season 1 is Phantom Blood, and what is it called? Phantom Blood and Battle Tenacity arc. Phantom Blood arc is just like only last like 9 episodes. Yeah, it only lasts about 9 episodes, which I saw this on Toonami and it felt longer than that, because this arc introduces you to like one of the greatest anime villains of all time, Dio Brando, and his rise to his power and status as one of the best villains in anime. And his father was just a effed up individual, drunk, beats his wife, and like even and his his kid berates his kid, and no wonder his kid turns into a freaking psychopath. But just to make it even worse, like, because like if there's anybody that Dio even held in like any kind of respect, was his own mother. But when she died, this pissant of a father sold her belongings, even the stuff that she was buried with, just to get enough money for some more booze. It was like, when he died, it was like, he deals so relieved. But when the father was introduced, he bumped into Joseph. No, Jonathan Joestar was the original. Joseph is the grandfather to Jotaro. So yeah, my bad. Jonathan Joestar. Oh, I gotta say, brilliant on the writer of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, because a lot of his characters, because the one thing I did not like in season 1, because they kind of like, which I kind of glad they did moving to season 2 on forward, is the fact that lack of stance. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, their unique thing is they have like these stands that give certain people powers that do some very unique things with it. They did not have that in season 1. And by season 2 moving forward, it became a staple. And one other thing is that the writer, when he created JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, there's a few things that made it iconic. The fact that he was a fan of like 80s action movies. That's why in season 1 and 2, a lot of the characters were kind of like, beefy dudes that, it's kind of reminiscent of like, Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. But also he took a trip to Rome, on like a what do you call those things, like studying abroad kind of situation, or maybe a vacation in general. But he was so fascinated about like the artwork. It's just like when you see the characters do certain poses, they do like this or something like that, and it's like these kind of like very artistic poses when they do certain stances and when they prepare to pull off a move or something like that. Which is makes it very unique. But the one I really like that I want to make a point of is the fact that some characters are named after either musical artists or a song from that said artist. Like there's a character called Robert Robert E. Speedwagon. Robert E.O. Speedwagon, which is like a play on REO Speedwagon. Will Zeppeli, Led Zeppelin, Smokey Brown, Cars, AC/DC, Wamu, which is kind of like a play on the musical artist Wham. Then like in later seasons you get something like shoot, I'm blanking on the names. You get certain characters like I don't think it was like on purpose, but you got like a character like Iggy. I'm thinking Iggy Azalea, which is, it'd be funny if that was like the case. You got Vanilla Ice, ZZ for ZZ Top, Steely Dan, Oingo Boingo. You pretty much Khan, like Shaka Khan. You pretty much get the point, and it's like I love that. That was so genius and creative to do, and it kind of make this anime kind of stand out. And I was of course like I guess he was dealing with like a lot not maybe not a lot, but certain copyrights, because he's using like an artist's name. He's playing around with the name, with the spelling of it. Like AC/DC isn't spelled AC star lightning bolt DC. It's like it, in this case AC/DC is spelled ESIDISI. And he kind of like got around that one, but it's just that certain things like Smokey Brown is like, that's how you spell it, Smokey Brown. Which at first I did not catch on to that when I first saw season 1. Because I saw season 2 and first before I eventually caught on to season 1. But when I eventually got to season 1, when I first saw the character of Smokey Brown, my first instinct was like, wow, that is a completely racist ass name. Until I eventually caught on, it's like, oh, they're playing on the musical artist named Smokey Brown. But I thought like, just because he's black, you call him Smokey Brown. But that wasn't the case. So that was my bad. My jump to conclusions. But it was, I love that idea. But I'm glad because in this season you get the introduction of like vampires and Hamon, which is kind of like a energy, kind of like the Force, but it's kind of like an energy that pulsates through your body. It's kind of their power. But I'm kind of glad they kind of did away with that, because it's very specific for the villains that they was fighting in season 1, which is like Pillar Man and vampires, who in this universe is susceptible to this hormone, which is kind of like harnessing the sun in a way. But then moving forward, it was stands, and it's like that's the adversaries that most people will be dealing with. So hormone, I never was too keen on that. That I'm glad they just did away with that. But yeah, Dio's father, came across Jonathan's father, because it's like some kind of crash on a stagecoach, because it's 1880 England at this time. You get certain jump cuts per arc or season into like certain like a generation or two in the future. This is like the George Joestar is like it's kind of like Castlevania in a way. It's like you get these certain like patriarchs, famous patriarchs and matriarchs of this famous family, and like different adversaries that they deal with through each generation. But because George in his Disney estate, he assumed that Dio's father was there to like help provide some assistance, because the mother died, protecting the baby, which was Jonathan at the time, from being killed in the crash. George managed to survive along with the baby, but then promised like to help Dio's father with anything he wants, no matter what, because in his mind he went out his way to help George in his time of need. But of course he was only there to rob him because he thought it was like a dead body. But as soon as on his deathbed, Dio's father handed him a note saying like, hey, this guy owes us, so you're gonna take what you can from this fool, and like you do something with your life, blah blah blah. So because at this point Dio's just like one screwed up psycho kid, and like the first thing he does was he goes onto the property of the Joestar residence. He kicks Jonathan's dog, just wham, like a soccer ball. And it's like that's usually the first sign, at least a red flag, that he's a psychopath. When you harm like it's not like a paint, like like a broad brush over it, people like that. But it's not something to be ignored when when you find out like a kid is done harm to an animal, not once but twice, and where it's like he puts the kid dog in the oven and roasted it. And it's like, this dude's fucked up. And he's only got progressively worse, when he eventually become a vampire, because, Jonathan wants to become an archaeologist. He found this, his father found this stone mask that, they eventually find out once it's covered in blood, it activates these spikes behind it. And it, like, if you're wearing it at the time, these spikes activate. And of course, the origin come into play, in the second arc. It was created by the Pillar Man, these, superior beings, back, I want to say prehistoric times, but like early man. And it's kind of like underground, kind of a, small race of people that, cannot walk out in the light. Eventually, the main villain of the second arc created this stone mask in order to create, vampires, in order to like have an army, or at least take, the lives of, to replenish their bodies, kind of situation. Of course, they don't know that yet. Dio's, going through these machinations just to not only torment Jonathan, but also trying to like worm his way. He doesn't even care about the family, and despite George doing everything he can to make sure Dio, because he's the only child now, he gets, everything he needs. But it wasn't until his deathbed he realized how like screwed up, that kid is. But it's like, you spend most of the time, and I relate to like Jonathan, somewhat, as far as like, being like, just like a decent human being, but just getting berated left and right without, any kind of like, understanding, or just not like my parents like sucked or anything like that, but it's just like, I know, like in general, I was a good kid. It's not like I wasn't one of those kids that like was out all night drinking or doing all God knows what kind of stuff. I was a pretty decent person, gentle, usually in the house, just mind my own business, and and just playful and stuff like that. I get certain things wrong. I misinterpret things just like anybody else, human. But it's just like, just getting yelled at, without any kind of mostly from the stepmother, but like without any kind of like, men of understanding, or like just explanation, so I will learn better to do better kind of situation. So like, not to get into the weeds of it, but like when I see that play out, it just hits me in like a nerve. And as Jonathan warms up to this woman, later to be named Arena Joestar, formerly known as Arena Nee Pendleton, as the first matriarch of the Joestars. She essentially was, sexually harassed by Dio, because Dio want to make sure that at home and outside, in his like, among his peers, he is, looked upon in disgust. He just want to make sure that his life is just, it's kind of like Matilda. It's like he's doing everything he can just to make sure, this kid's just like going to have a rough upbringing, and just like, it was hard to watch in some cases, until Jotaro, or at least Jonathan, had enough, and just like, well, at first he's like no match for Dio, because Dio's like still kind of fairly has a fair understanding of how to fight better than Jonathan, because Jonathan, living on a lap of luxury, never had to worry about having to fist fight anybody. It wasn't eventually halfway through, or at least part way through the first arc, Phantom Blood, when they start becoming like bulky now. It's like, I guess like a couple of years goes by, then they become scrawny little kids until like bulky young men. It's like, holy crap. And it's like turn to The Rock or John Cena, bare minimum. And of course, Dio's trying to play possum for a while until he doesn't want to overplay his hand because he doesn't want to like ruin his chances of like milking everything he has from this family. So for a little while he's playing possum, but Jonathan underneath does not buy it, given the fact that the crap he pulled, it was just like relentless. He knows he doesn't mean it, but he's playing along until he figures him out. But it wasn't until he eventually finds out that Dio's been slowly poisoning George until like he dies so he can get whatever monetary gains he can to be become like get the share of the Joestar fortune. And then eventually he figured out about the stone mask and the potential power. He utilizes it on himself because eventually after Jonathan goes into like the slums where he meets REO Speedwagon and figured out that the poison that Dio used on George they got from their neighborhood, and Dio uses the mask, turned himself into a vampire, and killed George. Eventually, in the scuffle, the Joestar mansion was burnt down. Thinking Dio's perished in it, but he managed to hang on because he's one of the few like anime villains that really like hanging on. Never truly dies. It's like very hard to kill. And you get Phantom Blood when it's like he meets Zeppeli, who teaches him about Hamon and utilizing it in order to like defeat Dio because he's building like a vampire army to take over Europe. And it's like it was like a big it was like interesting like because JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is kind of like a mix between mystery and cross country adventure and like just cool fights. And now that I brought it up, I gotta say there's cool moments when it's like when they locked in battle was kind of unique to only JoJo's Bizarre Adventure from my perspective, is that they, when one side feels like, they're, got the upper hand, the other opposing person's like, slips something that kind of trips up the other person, and they got to explain themselves. Like, of course, while he was lighting his flame and laying those leaves on fire, I didn't realize he took my pinky ring and utilized it as like a whip to snare me on my chain, kind of situation. It's kind of like that, where it's like it's kind of cool things where you see like subterfuge being played out in the middle of a fight, but sometimes they overdo it. Not even just in this season, it's just the anime in general, where it's kind of like they don't need to explain every little thing because we see it play out. It's like, oh my God, he's using his hands to strangle him to death. We get it. We see it. You don't have to say that part. We get it. It's just certain things like that. It's just kind of like, that's the one thing I kind of like, get bugged by, in this anime where it's like, you don't need to explain, because at a certain point it's over-explaining. Like, I can see that he's being strangled. Now, you do need to explain how he managed to undercut him in the middle of a battle, thinking he's about to die, but he somehow got this, fishing line on a hooking on the back of his belt buckle or something like that to drag him, away from being, dealing a death blow or something like that. That you can definitely explain because that's not something we see immediately. But, that's one of the cons I have about it. Well, kind of, slash pro slash con. Because I like this explanation on certain things that I don't see. I don't like the explanation on things that I can clearly see being played out in the animation. Uh, but eventually, oh, and that's another thing. Like, I could not see. That's probably the one thing. Oh no, there's at least a couple of things in the entire series I do not like seeing because it kind of like unnerved me. As like, there's one in season 3 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but we'll get to it eventually. It happens where this serial killer kills this pudgy short dude that you he becomes like a nuisance at first. Becomes kind of like a kind of like a pudgy little con man. Well, eventually, kind of like warm up to him, becomes part of the crew, and then just like a brief spoiler. I'm not going to get too far into it because I'm not going to tell his name or anything like that. We'll get to it, but he ends up dying. But beforehand, he leaves off some kind of like a secret note about what's going on before he dying, and it's kind of like sad, and it's hard for me to watch that. Just like in this, it's kind of hard for me to watch where as Dio's turn like a nearby village into a group of vampires. He's kidnapping several people, one of being like a woman while she's she's holding her baby, she's crying and she's begging to be let go, and Dio promises, well, I'm not gonna do anything to you, but he I'm not gonna kill you, but he turns her into a vampire, and then as she's turned, she feasts on her baby. And it's like when I first saw that, I had to skip really because I knew I see what was coming. I had to skip past all that stuff. That I never liked seeing anything happen to children. That always bothered me. That hurts my soul. I cannot see anything like that. I never like anything like that. Never. I never want to see anything like that. But as they go through and battle these knights, one being honorable and one just being a plain old monster. Because this is how Jonathan acquires his sword. These two, medieval knights that was, betrayed, by the Queen of England. I think it was like, Queen of France that they worked for. She was already dead, but they turned themselves in to protect her, but she was already dead, and they was already on like on the chopping block, and their souls remain restless. Dio brought them back to life to like fight for him, but one being honorable and the other just being a monster. And then you see like him like Dio turn like this is around the time of Victorian era where like he turned Jack the Ripper into one of his minions, and you see Jonathan while he's in his final training of learning Hamon fighting a vampiric Jack the Ripper, and he looked like he was holding like using like a big hair clip thing, like a gigantic sharp hair clip thing to ensnare people, and it's like, what the fuck kind of weapon is he wielding? It's like Jack the Ripper wielded a knife for what the history books tells us, or you can just use an ordinary knife. Why you gotta use this exaggerated, overly complicated, gigantic hair clip? Where you even get that custom made to use to fight with? It's so cumbersome and unwieldy. That's weird or bizarre. But you get to see a lot of bizarre things in this series. But eventually, when they get to Dio, because they run, to because the one of the monster of a knight that has no honor killed Zeppeli, but not before he sent out a letter to his own teachers to come help in on the fight. That taught him Hamon. One of the people there named Straitso, that's his name, Straitso, he eventually becomes like a betrayer for a short couple of episodes in the second arc. But here he's just like a young man, and like he's helping to defeat all these vampires and put an end to Dio. But we won't find out until the beginning of the arc 2 where he's like secretly admiring Dio and the power of youth that the mask bestowed upon him, and that's what he eventually acquires years later. But as we believe that Jonathan finally finished off Dio and his wickedness, he marries Arena. Yeah, Arena. They decided to take a go on a boat ride, take a vacation to I think like I don't know if it was like to the New World, no, not the New World, but just like to America. But the ship doesn't make it because one of Dio's minions managed to stick around, carry because his head, Dio's head was cut off, but he still managed to hang on a bit, and he started being fed, different crewmates on the ship. Dio managed to kill Jonathan, which is kind of unique in an anime where the main character dies at the end of an arc or a season, which you never usually see in anime, which is kind of took me by surprise when I first saw it. Like, holy crap, that's like. And you think they pairs both because Arisa and this baby, who's the only survivor among her, between her and Arisa, because Dio's just killing everybody on the ship, and the ship is going ablaze, and this fight ensues between Jonathan and Dio, and they both end up sinking to the ground. We later find out, Dio, cut off Jonathan's head to take over, to steal his body, because despite his hatred for Jonathan, in the end he grew to respect Jonathan and his tenacity and his wherewithal to like overcome whatever kind of crap he put on to Jonathan. He overcame it and became stronger, which he kind of admired a bit. And in his admiration, he says, I will just take your body, because it just grew to just sheer perfection in my eyes. But because he's sunk in the bottom of the ocean, he's there for a very long time, until in season 2 when he was drudged up from the water. But then you get into arc 2, and you're dealing with the Pillar Man, which it'd be interesting to see, like, if the Pillar Man actually had to fight Dio, how that battle would go out. Because I doubt Dio, despite his stand, I don't know if they was he would be able to actually go toe to toe with the Pillar Man like that. But these ancient beings, well, you hear about them, but the first one, which was because the primary 3 are found in Rome, but there's one extra that was located in Mexico. Now, before we even get into that, as Straiso betrays Ariel Speedwagon, who eventually after years became like a oil magnate, and like dedicated his life for like research into science and medicine and everything like that. He led this expedition and found like this another stone carving with this Pillar Man and another stone mask embedded with him, and Straiso killed them all. Didn't realize until like the last minute that all their blood. Well, he didn't kill Ariel Speedwagon. He was just seriously injured, but he was found because this is 1938 at this point, and this is like at the beginning of World War II. And you get this character called Stroheim, who's like really hard on for like German science and everything like that, and becomes like a cyborg. But despite him being like a Nazi, he definitely like had his heroic moments here with helping the Joestars defeat the Pillar Man. Because when the first Pillar Man they were introduced to, ironically, was the weakest one, despite the fact that he was like tough for them to beat. Uh, uh, they realize, it's like one of like the perfect human specimen. But he technically was not human. It's kind of like a different tier of human. But he's like susceptible to like sunlight. It's probably like the only weakness besides Haman, which is in a variation of the sunlight. He killed pretty much all like the Nazi soldiers and scientists in the room except Straiso. I mean, except Stroheim, Speedwagon, and then Jonathan. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Straiso becomes a vampire, decides to go after Jonathan in New York, who he feels like will eventually become a problem if he don't. Knowing his family lineage, he will probably become a problem down the line. So you want to like deal with it right here and now. Jonathan being like a kind of like a con man of sorts and like a trickster, managed to defeat Straiso, but not before dying. Straiso tells him about like these pillar man. You got to go to Mexico and stop and and stop them before they rise up, because if the stolen mask create creatures of the night, what do you think these kind of pillar man will be? So he goes there, not only there to find out what's going on with Speedwagon, just to make sure he's safe, or whether or not he's dead or alive, and then they dealt with this pillar man. What did I don't know what Stroheim called him. Santana. And it's funny because the writer of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure is known to be very forgetful. So certain things very few, it's like rare occasions he introduced certain things and then forgets about it at a certain point, and he never brought up again. Like this character, after Joseph and Stroheim defeat him, the other Pillar Man doesn't even bring him up at all. Nobody brings him up again ever. It's mainly because the writer forgot to even bring it up. But after that battle, he Joseph decides to go to Rome, meet up with the grandson of Will Zeppeli, is Caesar Zeppeli, who has chip on his own shoulder about what the Stone Mask and Pillar Man did to his family, because he loved his family. His father he always considered like a great man, until all of a sudden he just often left with no explanation. Think he just left his family, thinking he probably met a new girl and he started like a new life somewhere, until later on in his life, after he became like some kind of street thug, he saw him, was attempting to try to kill him, and then saw how he found like the ruins of these other Pillar Man, and Caesar tripped some kind of trap, and his father jumped in, took the brunt, and got absorbed inside the wall, not realizing that was his son that he just saved. So now Caesar is kind of on a mission to make sure these Pillar Men are dead and everything like that, and it's primarily trying to make sure they don't get, once they're resurrected, they don't get their hands on these this ruby that will power them up and be able to avoid the dangers of sunlight. Get some water. But yeah, uh, but they realized that uh, some of the Nazis who got some information from Stromheim about like these pillar men and they witnessed the sunlight. So they got like these UV strobe lights on these pillar men just to make sure that while they're studying it, they don't rise up and start attacking them. But it was proved pointless when they spill some blood to get it all over the lights so it'll block the UV lights, and they just start to like just slaughter everybody in the room. This one, Joseph, Caesar, and Speedwagon come in, and while they try to take on their Homon users, they're not it's not they're not at a certain level to warrant any serious threat to the Pillarman, even though they just woken up after like 5,000 years or something like that. And it's like they just like being tossed aside like rag dogs. And because Joseph is such a trickster, he played towards like kind of like placate towards their ego a bit. It's like, I managed to damage you even at this level, so I kind of ruined your honor a bit. But if I had like a 1 month, just 1 month, I can give you like a real like battle. So ACDC and WAMU place these poison rings inside Joseph, and it will dissolve and kill him in a month's time if he doesn't honor his part of the bargain. So like, yeah, go ahead, train. We'll meet up again, and we'll test your might. And they meet up with Lisa, which we later find out is Joseph's mother, who was the baby on that ship with Arisa. When she met, who she eventually got close to Joseph's father, who was because Lisa was adopted by Arisa, but Arisa was pregnant at the time of Jonathan's death. So when her son grew up, they got her Lisa and the boy got close. They end up having Joseph, but because one vampire after this whole carnage came and wormed his way into the like British Air Force, where he was a expert pilot, there, that kind of life kind of creeped up. He didn't know what was going on. He, that kind of information was never privy to him because he was just a normal guy. He didn't have like any hormone powers, and he got attacked and killed by this general who happened to be a vampire. Which of course, the man I think they called him George too, but he was just knew something was off, and he's investigating, got caught and killed, and then Lisa find out she murdered him, but to everybody else they thought she just murdered like a official general, and she became like a traitor, so she fled the country, leaving Joseph with Arisa. And for all Joseph knew for a long time was that both his parents died when he was young. So, I mean, like, you get to see like them meeting up with Lisa, training them in the ways of Haman, because she was trained by Straitso and the other monks in our art of Haman. You get to see like their like hardcore training, trying to climb up this pillar using their hum on through the fingertips, and then they gotta get past this oil that's blasting out in like a high pressure kind of wave that kind of you see like Caesar's pen getting cut straight in half just by the sheer force. So they each did like a unique way of getting past that. And then ACDC showed up. Joseph took care of him, beat him after his superior hum-on training, and then he meets up with his future wife that will eventually have the daughter, who eventually will have Jotaro, who we'll meet in season 2. Then they eventually, find the hideaway of the last 2 Pillar Men, and lo and behold, they find out that these they making more vampire guys, vampire army, and they finally duke it out in like this arena, kind of gladiatorial arena, and there's a chariot battle between Wamu and Joseph, which is cool as hell. Where it's like they shoot each other with different kind of crossbows. Joseph, of course, has to get like the biggest one. Good thing is he's gonna get like raw power, but it's because it's so big, he's having a hard time pulling back the bowstring to load it up. While Wamu got the littlest one, which is hard to pull back too, but he still managed to pull it off because it's so small. It's just the bowstring is kind of like strong. And then you see like they're going tit for tat, and like Joseph's getting hurt, here and there, but he just managed to pull off these certain tricks, damaging Wamu's arms, so he can't use his like wind blast, because he ends up killing Caesar in like this little wind tunnel kind of spiral cut move. But but Caesar managed to take use it, because he got this like bubble kind of hum on skill, and use one of those bubbles to steal off the ring with the antidote for Joseph. And Wamu, out of respect for his fellow opponent who fought with honor, he allowed that thing to go ahead and hopefully Joseph would take it. But he didn't want to take Joseph didn't want to take it until he actually officially beat Wamu as promised. And it's like in the end, Wamu became like such like an honorable kind of like opponent, despite him being like a bad guy. He's like one of those bad guys that like fights with honor, where in the end you respect the hell out of him. And I love Wamu. Out of all the Pillar Men, I love Wamu. He like fought with some straight honor, even like attacking other vampires that tried to like undercut Joseph's victory. And he's like, I have none of that. He beat me, and that is that. And so now he took the second antidote. Now he's able to fight 100% against Cars. And of course, Cars is like a whole different league. He eventually was able to utilize the stone he got for Lisa, because she was unprepared to deal, because she's an impressive fighter on her own right, but Cars is like, he's not unlike Wamu. He doesn't care about fighting with any kind of honor at all. He wants his stone. He wants to make sure he have the world underneath his heel. Because even his own people back in the day saw him as some kind of a monster, and he ended up him and I think him and ACDC was only two. It was the only other person that was willing to follow him in his quest for dominance. And the last two of their race were babies, which turned out to be Wamu and the other guy from Mexico, Santana. Once they it's down to him and Joseph, you get to see Smokey Brown and Ariel Speedwagon with Stroheim, and even like some of the German forces with UV strobe lights to take down a lot of like those vampire armies, and it's just down with like dealing with cars, and cars is like became immune to the sunlight, so now he's like everybody's afraid, and he's just going right after. He's able to morph his body parts into different animal forms, so he's just like a superior, kind of, just pretty much like almost near God at this point. So he's going after Joseph, who's doing his signature special move, which is running away. And he's, but he's not just running away. He's leading him away from the people, because he knows cars want to come after him most of all. So he's going to the lake. He takes one of the German airships, trying to fly or at least lead cars to this active volcano, because he figured if anything can stop this dude, it's just drowning him in lava, because nobody can get out of that. Which is technically true until cars, eventually when he gets him towards the active volcano, he slams the plane into him that lands into the, once he ejects, he lands right into the active volcano in the lava, and cars managed to form some kind of barrier, like pockets of air, kind of similar to what Wamu did when his fight against Caesar, in order to funnel it enough where it provided enough of a protection for him to get away from the lava. And he tunnels underneath the rock, pops up and cuts off Joseph's hand, which we later, if you get into season 2, you want to know why he has a robotic hand. This is why. But Joseph pulled off this kind of cool move where he, blasts part of the rock him and cars are standing on into the air, and just far enough where he's throwing rocks and pushing it with Harmon to further push cars right into the upper atmosphere and eventually into space, where at that point cars could not, despite his power, he could not, because of the lack of gravity, he's being he's out of the reach of the gravitational pull of the earth. So he's drifting, and no matter what wings or air propulsions, whatever he's trying to do, because sometimes they can fold these little bones that funnel air, they kind of utilize as propulsion system, but it freezes up, and it's at a certain point he's too far gone, and he's frozen into stone. And despite his massive power, he's turned to stone, he's drifting into space, and it's eventually, according to the narration, his mind goes blank, and he's just he's never to be seen again. And that's one way to deal with a guy like that. It's kind of it's probably a good way to deal with Doomsday from the DC universe. It's he will come back from if you try to kill him, he manages to adapt and become stronger, and you won't be able to kill him the same way twice. So usually you have to trap him. I think in one story arc they trapped him so far into the future where it's barren wasteland, he's just alone there, and it's you got no way to return. And it's that's usually the only way to beat someone like that, or toss him into space, hopefully drift into a black hole, or abandon on a barren wasteland of a planet, and just leave him there without any so far out that he can't be interacted with other aliens or any way to get off world. That's usually the only way to stop somebody like that. I wouldn't even risk tossing him into the sun, because like, it might work, but you don't know if like somehow he like evolved past being burnt alive. So it's like, but then again, he's inside a star. There's no way he can actually jump out, because there's no solid mass of rock to get its footing to allow any kind of leaping. But I don't know. It's just like when dealing with powerful characters like that, those are probably the only way to deal with them, because Cars has got to the point where sunlight is not going to affect them. Neither will Hamon at this point. So that's the end of Cars. Eventually, him and Suzuki got married while she was helping him mend. And in the epilogue, it's like 50 years later, is in like the 80s now. He's like something like in his mid to late 50s. He's still like, a very fit man for his age. So he's like visiting Japan to see his daughter and grandson, which continues on in season 2. Into that story arc where we get Dio back and dealing with him. But at this point he grew like a hatred of the Japanese, because his daughter married a Japanese man, and they decide to live in Japan where he can't even see his daughter, and at least that often. So now he has like a personal grudge against the Japanese because of that. So it's just like a funny little thing about him. But yeah, that was season 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It's not my favorite, to be perfectly honest. Despite it is cool moments. I think Phantom Pain is probably lacking in certain areas, but you get to, because it's kind of like just like normal people before, that you watching evolve into these powerful threats later. And you get to see like the origin of Dio and his, rise to power. That's a good thing to see. But man, it's just certain parts is kind of boring, kind of like, kind of want to fast forward to the good parts. But like the Pillar Man arc, that was, pretty good. It's just fun moments, fun characters to see. But it's not until season 2 that things really jump off and you really start getting entertained. And moving forward, that's how it just is. Because stands is a staple now. Hamon is like a thing of the past. I'm glad we done away with that. It's fun for a little bit for a specific type of enemy, but that's not, you don't deal with vampires anymore in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure world. You don't like people with their stands, or just human beings with different motivations and, that kind of thing. But overall, that's just a primary threat. So no more Hamon. Or even like you deal with a certain like here and there just regular creatures, and just strange bizarre creatures that pop up every once in a while. But yeah, the Hamon thing, it's not bad. It's a cool idea. It's not something that you see in anime before, but it's just that it just blah by comparison to like what we know JoJo's Bizarre Adventure to be. But let me know what you think of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure season 1, the Phantom Blood and the I just want to say Pillar Man arc, because I can't remember what technically is. Battle Tenacity, this Pillar Man arc, for God's sake, that's what it is. But anyway, I will be the next thing I'll be reviewing, since we'll be heading into October. I think it'd be fitting for me to start binge watching Death Note. It's probably like the darkest show I ever watched in my life, but still palatable for me. But there's certain thresholds of dark that I'm willing to see. Anything beyond Death Note is too dark for me. I can't, deal with that. It's just like just a straight up this gore fest at that point. But like, yeah, I think like with Death Note, which I saw a couple of times in the because a friend of mine like got me into it a few years ago, and it's a pretty good show. There's a lot to talk about in that, and but yeah, this is like it has a fair bit of darkness in it, and you got like a character who's like the main antagonist who's actually you're following, like he's the protagonist in a way, which is very unique. You never usually see that in, well, I want to say in TV shows, but in anime is definitely unique. So yeah, it's fun. I think it'll be my third time rewatching this out of like a couple of years. But yeah, it's gonna be fun, and we're gonna be talking about a lot of like psychology. You think like Dio's a psychotic person. This is one like not probably not as psychotic as or like a biggest threat as Dio is, but Light, the antagonist of Death Note, is definitely up there so far as like psychopathy and like just he's a piece of work. So we'll get to that, definitely hopefully by mid to the end of October, depending on what happens. So look forward to that. So I'll see you guys next time. Take care.